Hi everyone, Mr. Dunkel. Let's continue on with our chart stuff. And what we're going to do now is, now that we have a chart made, let's get in and play around with it a little bit and change some things about it, some things we need to add. So I'm going to select my chart. With it selected, you see I've got the little bounding boxes around it. And I've got some different things here I can do. Right off the bat, if I'm under design, I can go here to change colors, and I can change the colors of the bars. I'm just going to leave it at the default for now. I can also change the basic style of it. You notice if I kind of scroll through here, this one kind of puts a steel gradient background to it. This one at the end gives us a real nice dark background, so I'm just going to choose that. The other thing that you'll want to do when you make your chart is you're going to need to pay close attention to are your Y and X axes labeled. Do you have a chart title? Is everything clear and easy to see? So that's really what we're going to focus on in this one right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add some labels. With my chart selected, I've got a little plus sign over here. If you click on this, it gives you some options for chart elements. And the first thing I want to do is I need to access title. I need to be able to tell viewers what my y-axis stands for and what my x-axis stands for. So I'm going to come over here and choose Axis Titles. And when I do, I can have some options of do I want just the horizontal axis or the vertical axis. Chart title, I'm going to leave that there. Data labels is something I recommend that you do. What data labels does, if you notice I've take my cursor off of it, I have no numbers over here. But if I turn on data labels, it's now put numbers with each of those columns. And so this makes it easier for your viewer because now they can just look at this and know immediately this is for cats, rather than having to, if they're turned off, they have to come up here and then scroll all the way to the left and figure it out that way. So data labels are helpful. The only time you probably don't want to use them is if you just have a lot of data on here. For instance, if you were making a scatter plot, and then it would just get too busy and in the way. When you click on data labels, you'll notice you've got a little option menu over here. So you can control where they are. You can have them inside the label, at the base. You can have them outside at the end, all sorts of different things like that. I'm just going to leave them, let's do them inside. Let's actually do them outside at the end. Okay, there we go. Data table. What a data table does is it simply takes all this information and makes it part of your chart, of your graphic. Sometimes it's helpful if you're going to be printing it out and you want people to see your actual table that you set up. At the same time, if your data chart here, if your chart, excuse me, is very good, then you don't necessarily need it because we can figure out everything right here without having to look at the table, but you can add it. Error bars, wouldn't worry about those. There are a few times you might consider using those, but that's not going to happen that often. Grid lines is simply referring to the lines that are here in the background. You can take them off if you don't like them. I do recommend you leave them because it does make it a little bit easier for those who want to track over to the left. You also have control where you can add more. You can add your major vertical lines as well, and even minor lines. But you want to be careful of adding too much because then it just kind of gets a little busy. So if you don't need them, don't have them selected. Legend. It's real important that you always have your legend in there because that definitely helps, but you do have control over where you can put it. Notice here on the right, personally I kind of like it in this case at the top or the bottom because it makes my chart a little wider, as opposed to if you do it on left or right, it kind of squishes the chart. So I'm going to leave mine at the top up here. And so trend line, you'll use that in a scatter plot situation, and we'll talk about that at a later point. So let's jump in here and let's make some edits. For chart title, I can come in and just double click and go ahead and type whatever I want. I'll say animals in the shelter, so that the viewer knows what this is showing us. And now I need to label my y-axis and my x-axis. So over here for y-axis, I'm going to say number of animals. And then for my x-axis, let's call this, oops, get rid of that, types of animals. And there we have it. So I've got X and Y labeled, I have a title here, I have a legend, I've got data label. So right now it's a pretty good chart. It's easy to read. That is the key that you always need to keep in mind. Whenever you're making a graph or chart, make sure that it's easy to read. That's the most important thing. Because if people can't read your chart, then they can't make any sense out of all this hard work that you've done. Now, there are some things you can do to jazz stuff up a little bit. One thing you can do is you can change these backgrounds. Now, if you go with a default, and there are some great choices here with the defaults to choose, you're pretty much always going to be in good shape with a default. But you can get really fancy and add your own pictures in and things of that nature. So let me show you how to do that. When you're in your chart, you've got two basic areas. This area outside, kind of going around, this is called the chart area. Notice over on the right it says Format Chart Area. However, if you click inside, notice that we get the little bounding box just around the little columns here. This is called the plot area. Format plot area. So you can control these separately. So for instance, I could come in here, I'm under plot area. I could come in here to solid fill and give it a different background just for that section. I could actually come in here and add a picture to it. You'll see a picture, and the way I found this picture, by the way, was I went to online and I just did an Office online search, and I searched for puppies, and I found that picture there. But let's do a different one. We'll add this little fella in. I'm going to insert him, and you'll see it's now made him the background. But again, we're running into some issues now, because when you have the picture in here, notice my data level 4, it's a little bit harder to see because it's getting into this white area and it's a white font. So again, different ways we could deal with that. I could come over here to data levels and move those now inside the bars, and now they're a little bit easier to see. So just be aware of those types of things. As I mentioned, you could come back here to the chart area and you could do the same type of thing. I could make that a solid fill. What Automatic's going to do, by the way, is it's going to automatically go back to whatever you had selected. So if I go back to Automatic, it's got me back to this style here. But you can do patterns. Again, the key though is you'll notice that just added this pattern here. Now we can hardly read anything around it. So it's real important, again, the most important thing with your charts is that we can read it. So don't choose anything that's wild, crazy. Basically, the only thing I'd probably recommend for the most part, if you want to add a picture, add it into the background. Just make sure your data labels are maybe inside your columns, and that way we can still see them. But sometimes it's nice to have a picture that ties in with whatever your topic is that you're doing. So that's basically how you edit those kind of things. I do want to show you one other thing that comes into play sometimes is over here. I'm going to click on this axis, okay, and so I've got the y-axis selected. You'll see I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you recall at the beginning of this, though, it was doing it in increments of 0.51, 1.52, that type of thing there. So let me show you how you can deal with this. I've got this selected, and if I come over here to Axis Options, I've got all sorts of different things I can pull down, but the first one is bounds, and it tells me minimum, maximum. This is where you tell Excel, I want you to show from 0 to 5, for instance, but I could bump this up. Maybe I want to do 10. And if I do 10, you'll see it's now going from 0 to 10 instead of 0 to 5. I'm going to take it back to, let's go back to 5. You can also control the major and minor units. Now, what this is showing here, 1 is saying it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. But if I change this to 0.5, now I've got 0, 0.51, 1.52. Okay, so I don't particularly want this for this particular type of graph. I think it's, first off, if you have half a dog or 1.5 of a dog, you really need to go to the vet instead of the shelter. But for what we're doing here, I'm just going to leave that major as 1. And that way it's 1 dog, 2 dogs, 3 dogs, 4 dogs, 5 dogs. You also have different things you can play around with down in here. I really wouldn't mess with them for the most part with anything that you're going to be doing on your Axis Options. Just know that that's available. But you can control color as well and different things like that. So that's the basics for setting up how to change colors, add titles, add labels. The last thing I want to show you with this one is when it's time to print. There's a couple different ways to do it and something to be aware of. If I'm clicked off of the graph, and so like for instance I'm just here, and if I go to File, Print, and it's going to show me my preview, notice I'm getting kind of the whole page or everything that I have entered. But a lot of times when you've made a graph, you really just want to print the graph only. So a couple ways that I deal with this. First off, if you just select the graph and you have the bounding box around the graph itself, Then when you go to File, Print, all it's going to print is the graph itself. So that's kind of helpful. You'll notice we have big margins here, so we could go up into our page layout, potentially change our margins. We'll see if that makes a difference. Let's go look. Not much here in this case. And notice we do have narrow margins. So if you're finding a situation where you want your picture to be bigger or something like that, one thing that's helpful sometimes is just to copy it and then go into something like PowerPoint, and I'll open that up here, go to blank presentation, let me get rid of this stuff, and then I'm going to paste it in. And now that I've pasted it in, I can make it, as big as I want. I can move it around and add a little text column over here, and then I could just print out this slide kind of thing. So bear that in mind. It's very helpful sometimes just plop it into PowerPoint. It's amazing what all you can do in PowerPoint. If you do decide that you do want to print, though, regardless of whether you're printing in PowerPoint or here, one thing to remember for printing at school, 99% of the printers you're going to print to are black and white printers. And the way you can tell that has the M on it, which stands for monochrome. So if you print in my tech lab or most other places, it's going to be in black and white. If you do need to print in color, the one that you do have an option to print to is MJ211C. The C lets you know it's color. The issue, though, is that is Miss Dyer's printer, and so you need to get her permission before you print. Sometimes you have to even go into print setup, or excuse me, not page setup, printer properties, and right now it's defaulting to black and white. So even if you sent this to Miss Dyer's printer, it'd print in black and white. So you need to come here and change that to color before you send it. So you are able to do that. Like I said, just make sure you have her permission. And that's basically how you set up your charts as far as editing them. And hopefully that will be helpful. And I'll do another video on how to make charts like a scatter plot and a pie chart.